when you get exposed to the red light therapy. One of the major things that's happening is that you're suddenly having a massive release of ATP. And the ATP can't be stored in the body. It has to be used. The biphasic effect is if you overstimulate, you start to lose the effectiveness of the light therapy. If you start doing too much, then you have too much maybe vasodilation. You start getting immune responses happening, start getting rashes, you start getting peeling of the skin, you start getting things that we would traditionally not look at as a positive thing. So sunlight has a variety of different wavelengths, and it's not coherent. So it scrambles all over the place. And so the difference between the LEDs and the laser is that it's coherent and that it is usually limited to a very narrow range of wavelengths. Basically, we need about 20 minutes of exposure to sunlight a day to produce the vitamin D we need to supply our nutritional needs. 20 minutes of exposure of the upper torso per day will supply the vitamin D, but it does other things also. It actually starts to protect you against cancer. When we do the laser treatment on Parkinson's, we do the head and we do the gut, and they feel heat in the gut. So you don't just buy a laser and, put it on your head. Sometimes the laser isn't the most appropriate treatment right away.
Today, I do a follow-up interview with Dr. Randy Beck from the Institute of Functional Neuroscience in Australia. My first interview with him was extremely popular and also quite controversial in parts. So in today's interview, not only do we take another deep dive into the world of red light therapy and brain health, but I also ask for some clarification on some points he made in that first interview. As well as that, we look at what you need to do and what you shouldn't do when it comes to treating the brain, what wavelengths and intensities are the best, how too much can be dangerous, and maybe less is more when it comes to red light therapy. We talk about red light therapy and the gut and the link it has with the brain. And also, there's a few things that have really got me thinking whether I should change my personal in-home red light therapy protocol. More on that later in the video. Let's get into it. Dr. Beck, thank you so much for taking the time to return to the show. It's always a pleasure. Let's dive straight into it. Since we last spoke, what new things have you learned in regards to photobiomodulation or red light therapy and brain health?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for asking me to come back. It's a great podcast that you're doing, and you're putting out a lot of really, really good information for people. And based on, some of the questions that I'm getting back, you're doing a wonderful job. So keep it up, keep going. People are interested and they're happy with the information you're providing. And I know you, and I know that you're only putting out stuff that you believe is true. And that's, half the battle in this field is getting rid of some of the misconceptions and the, sometimes outright lies that people are telling. So I appreciate you and appreciate your followers and the questions they've asked, because the more we can spread the reality and the truth about this, the better it can help people. So thank you for doing what you're doing. Stuff that, I want to get into, we did a little bit of a process, you and me together, and we'll get into that in a minute about how we went out searching for lasers that are that can be used on the brain, but also fall into a certain price category, and the challenges we had and what we've learned about that. But we'll get into that in a second. But to answer your question, I have a lot of questions coming in about full body red light therapy and why some people will feel really good for the first 4 or 5 treatments or exposures or whatever. And then they start losing the effect and they start actually not feeling that great. So I've tried to give some thought to that. And I think even though this isn't a, proven study or it's not been a researched as such. I do think that the physiology probably makes sense, that what's happening is your body, when you get exposed to the red light therapy, one of the things that's happening, and there are a lot of things that are happening, by the way, we'll get into later, but one of the major things that's happening is that you're suddenly having a massive release of ATP. And the ATP can't be stored in the body. It has to be used. Now, there is one storage mechanism, and that is the ATP can be converted to glycogen and be stored in your liver. And that, for all the people out there who are weightlifters or sprinters or, people working out, they'll know that that glycogen limit in the liver is around 2,000 calories. So once that's done, then the ATP has to be used up. Now, luckily, the skin, which is actually the largest organ of the body, is active all the time. So a lot of that ATP can be used up and do a lot of positive things. Now, but what happens is, as you continue the exposures, then that effect is going to fall off, and you're now going to start you're going to experience the biphasic effect of laser, which, let me get this in here. The biphasic effect is if you overstimulate, you start to lose the effectiveness of the light therapy. And I'll get into this in a little bit more later on. I'll bring up the picture and I can show you where it all happens. But so I think what I've discovered, or what my advice would be to people. Now, you're much more of an expert on this than I am as far as full body light stuff. But what I would recommend is if you're going along and you're feeling great, then keep going and maybe even reduce the exposure time slightly over time. And as long as you're feeling good, then you can keep doing that. But if you start feeling crappy, reduce the exposure time and then work back up and see if that changes how you feel. Okay, because really, when we're talking about all of the variables that are happening, and there are a lot, individual response is what's important. So you are actually the experiment. Okay, so you have to figure out what exposure works best for you by how you feel.
Yeah, it's so tricky because I get asked this all the time, like, how long should I use it? How often? Time of the day? And I mean, we don't know. We're doing our best, but when there's no hard science on this, it's hard to come up with recommendations. And then you have so many variables, like each panel. I mean, behind me, there's a bunch of panels hanging up. Every single one of those is putting out different wavelengths, different intensity. Like, you can't just copy paste the dosage protocol. And then you have variables with the individual, skin color, the amount of hair on there, distance they're standing from the panel. Someone with a really big belly, they may be 6 inches from their belly button, but then like their neck is actually 9, 10, or 11 inches from it. Whereas someone lean, there's so many variables. It's nearly impossible to come up with one set rule. But yeah, I've said similar things to what you just said, like experiment, start out with these sort of rough guidelines, see how you feel, and then, it's work backwards from that. If you don't notice anything, you can maybe go up a little bit. But it's interesting because people get so caught up in that more has to be better, right? But then, I don't know, let's say you have a headache or, I don't know, a throbbing ankle or something, and you go and take paracetamol, Tylenol, I think it is in America, maybe 2 capsules is all you need to kill the pain. But that doesn't mean you should go take 10. And in fact, if you were to take 10, you could kill yourself. I mean, people die from overdose with this stuff. So yeah, I mean, maybe you could go to 3 capsules if it's really bad. But then if that works, next time it happens, maybe try 2. And then if that still works, next time try 1. You're trying to get the minimum effective dose, I guess. I just have a question here. There's a couple things I'd like to unpack here. Firstly, you mentioned the skin. Now, do you think the skin is potentially taking that extra ATP, because the skin's going to be overloaded the most, right? The skin's effectively receiving the most light photons, the light energy. If you're treating the brain or a joint, it's got to go through the skin, right? So do you think the skin could potentially have a way of dumping this extra ATP, whether it's through heat or potentially rashes? I know some people develop rashes, or even it has a defense mechanism. I know some people who are doing high dose light for beauty benefits develop hyperpigmentation, and there's another word, melanase, I think it is. Do you think this could potentially be a byproduct of overdoing it, the skin's way of handling this?
Absolutely. So, okay, first of all, there's a lot of things happening in addition to just releasing ATP because of how the light affects the physiology inside the cells. So there's also a release of nitric oxide, and nitric oxide causes vasodilation in most vessels. And that's probably one of the reasons why the skin feels better, is that you're getting more circulation into your skin, and that, causes toxins to be removed, and, homeostatic balance and all kinds of things in the skin. Now, you have to realize that it's a two-edged sword, just like you said. If you start doing too much, then you have too much, maybe vasodilation. You start getting immune responses happening, start getting rashes, you start getting peeling of the skin, you start getting things that we would traditionally not look at as a positive thing. Now, there is one other cautionary thing that we need to talk about, which I tried to find research on this. I did a very quick search, but I couldn't find anything reliable. Let's put it that way. And that is, if you're exposing your skin to the light therapy and it's releasing ATP, it's releasing nitric oxide and all these things that are normally good in healthy skin, it's also going to be bad if you have any kind of skin cancer or tumor, because it's going to vasodilate the tumor tissue. It's going to give the tumor tissue ATP, and that tumor will grow faster. Now, that's just a theory, because I couldn't find any actual research. I would bet the farm that if you have, skin cancer or some other cancer related closely to your skin, it's going to exacerbate that problem. So you need to be very careful about overdosing or even minimal dosing. And it's not to say that you can't still do a minimum dose. It's just that once that dose exceeds the health benefit and starts going into feeding the tumor, that's not a good thing.
One other thought, though, I have to ask. You live in Australia. The sun's pretty intense there. What difference does a panel like this, how is it different to just someone who spends the day at the beach? There's a lot of energy in the summer sun, right?
Yeah. So it's because of the physics of how light is produced, basically. And so sunlight has a variety of different wavelengths, and it's not coherent. So it scrambles all over the place. And so the difference between the LEDs and the laser is that it's coherent, and that it is usually limited to a very narrow range of wavelengths. So what we're doing is we're concentrating the amount of the energy from the light that gets into the tissues that we want to target. So, for instance, you could go out in the sun and still get, you do. That's sort of how we've evolved over time, and that's why these organelles inside our body have receptors for light. Okay, so it is getting, some of the light is getting through. The difference is it's more intense when we have LEDs or lasers because of how that light is produced. Now, basically, we need about 20 minutes of exposure to sunlight a day to produce the vitamin D we need to supply our nutritional needs. So if you're getting 20 minutes of light a day, and that, depending on where you read or what research you're looking at, usually it is exposure of the upper torso. So if you had your shirt off, or if you had, for a woman, you have a bikini top on or something like that, 20 minutes of exposure of the upper torso per day will supply the vitamin D. But it does other things also. It actually starts to protect you against cancer, believe it or not. So when you're exposed to the real light for 20 minutes a day, it starts to build up melatonin defenses and other things that will guard against development of skin cancer. So if you look at the people who get skin cancer, it's usually two extremes. The people who are in the sun all the time, construction workers, people who are outside that don't protect usually their scalp or their forearms, sometimes their back, and the people who never go in the sun, but go out and get a sunburn occasionally. Those are the people that usually get it. So if you're regularly being exposed, and I would think that the light therapy would do the same thing. So if you're doing 5 minutes of light therapy a day, which is probably equivalent to 20 minutes in the sun, and that's just me using rough calculation, but it seems reasonable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I have to ask, in our last interview, you mentioned how you were hesitant recommending people to use light therapy, high intense light therapy at eye level or above, because obviously it can reach the brain, or will reach the brain, and potential downsides as a result of that. Now, a lot of people have been confused about that. A lot of people are scared, maybe, a little bit nervous about how they should use their products. I mean, maybe they'll purchase a panel like this and they think, hey, should I drop it down? So I just want to ask a little bit about this. When you made that comment, were you referring specifically to lasers like we're using with Thomas, and we can talk more about that soon? Or are you referring to also LED devices that sure don't have that narrow band in terms of looking at the wavelengths, but there's still a lot of concentrated red light in it? And is it only like devices that are putting out very high energy, 100 milliwatts over centimeter squared or above? Keen to get a bit of clarification here.
Right. So, and these are exactly some of the questions I've been getting too. And that's why I later on in this talk, I want to go into a little bit more detail about wavelengths and intensities and all that kind of stuff, because that's really what it depends upon. So if going into the skin, okay, is way different than going into the brain. Okay, because we have to go through skin, bone, cerebral spinal fluid, and then into the brain tissue. So there's a lot of things in there that will attenuate the laser power before it gets to your brain. So the problem is, when I made that comment, I didn't know what power people were using in the screens, in the LED screens. So if it's a power and a wavelength that's designed only to penetrate the skin, you're probably pretty safe, because it'll penetrate the skin and then it'll stop at the skull, pretty much. Now, if you're using wavelengths 860 and above, some of that is probably going to get into the brain. Okay, so if it's the penetration is way higher, about 900 nanometers, but it still is going to get some in. So that's where we have to sort of say, okay, well, if you're using wavelengths below, I would say 860, and power intensity that is designed only to penetrate the skin, you're probably fine doing full stuff. Now, if you have issues that for some reason allow penetration to happen deeper, like for instance, usually melatonin will stop the laser penetration. It'll make it less. So if you're very white, melanin, sorry. And I was thinking about sleep stuff, but melanin, yes. So if you're very, very white or you haven't been in the sun, the penetration may be greater. Okay. So when you first start out, you might want to think, okay, I'm just going to be safe, I'm just going to run the laser here or the lights here. Once I start getting used to it, then I can, raise it all the way up.
Yeah, it's actually something that I have thought a lot about since that conversation, because what's happening is the panels now are getting very powerful. 2-3 years ago, 6 inches, 40, 50 milliwatts, right? Now, we're close to 100 at 6 inches. So that means if you were to go right up to the panel, we could be 150, 200 milliwatts. I mean, that's getting into the laser sort of territory, medical laser sort of territory. And then at the same time, you have to think, well, okay, I want that intensity to help get into my glutes, into my quads, into my joints, into my hips, all that good stuff. But when it comes to the face, like really, I just want it for the skin benefits, right? The beauty aesthetic benefits. So I don't need that intensity. And then with the potential risk, like your concerns, it's made me start thinking, all right, well, maybe we just go from the neck down or shoulders down. And then I do a quick 1-minute session on the face, because really when you think about it, that's all you probably need from a skin point of view. So it was a question I had to ask, because I know if I didn't ask that, people would be like, why did you not ask that? So thanks for that. I then also have to ask, following up on this, well, 2 questions. Firstly, what is the risk here? Like if someone did have that 150 milliwatt panel and there was 850 nanometers in it. I mean, there's a panel out there now with 1060 in it, and they were putting their head right up against the panel for 5-10 minutes a day. What is the risk with that? What could happen? I mean, the brain better than anyone I know. What are we gambling with?
Well, the danger with that is that if they have an asymmetry in their brain, and most people will have some areas of asymmetry, even if they don't have symptoms, because the brain has developed strategies to overcome the asymmetries that they have. So when I say asymmetries, one part of the brain is a little bit higher than, say, another part of the brain here. If you expose the laser to the part that is already too high, so think about what's happening. When it's too high, that means the activity level is high. That means the neurons are firing more. They're using more ATP, they're drawing more blood flow. Now you put the laser on it, and it accentuates all of that. So it makes the asymmetry worse. So now we get one side rising and the other side not rising, because it's already too low in activity, or not drawing as much as this side is. So it's kind of like with the cancer situation. You're fertilizing a problem. And then when that separation gets too much, then the strategies that the brain has developed to deal with that break down. And then we start getting symptoms. And with the asymmetries, depending on where they are in the brain, they can result in all kinds of symptoms, from depression to pain to thought processing problems. Like all different types of symptoms start to happen. So I have had a patient that ordered a laser off the internet and applied it to herself. I think she only did 3 or 4 applications, and she developed psychosis. And that is serious stuff. I mean, we've probably been working on her for about a year now to try and reverse that. And it's serious psychosis where she's feeling the presence of, entities in the room with her, and, they're not always positive entities. So it's bizarre stuff. And she is so devastated because she did this basically to herself. She did it on her own. And following advice that she got on the internet, by the way, from the developer of this system. So it was one of these systems where they pretend like they're taking an EEG, but they only got 2 electrodes. Like, what? And then based on those 2 electrodes, they're telling her where to fire the laser. It's totally irresponsible. And actually, if they were medical professionals, it would be malpractice. But because they're just selling a product, it's pretty hard to hold them to it, I suppose. But those are the types of things that can happen. You can also create pain. So, for instance, you're doing, the laser, and an area of your brain that is feeling what's called nociception, which is not really pain. Pain is the perception of nociception. But when the brain has nociceptive activity, sometimes it can stop it from becoming an actual perception. So you don't feel the pain, even though technically it's there and you should feel it. But when you take away that strategy that the brain has developed, suddenly you start getting pain. And the giveaway here is usually the pain is on the same side of the body. So suddenly you'll be getting shoulder pain, hip pain, knee pain, all on the same side of the body. And right away you go, okay, all those joints just don't break down at the same time. It's happening. So, oh no, I'm basically trying to come up with some examples that I've actually seen. I mean, theoretically, you could cause all kinds of stuff.
It's a bit scary. So if someone's brain was in balance, and I'd be curious to know how many people's brains are in balance, could you then argue that a 5-10 minute dose a couple times a week is probably safe? You don't need to answer that for medical reasons and all of that. But do you know where I'm going? Like, is it only at risk if there are imbalances and or you're potentially overdoing it? Like, just like anything in life. I mean, a gym session for an hour or 2 might be fine, but a 12-hour session, you're going to need a lot of rest and recovery from it. But is that a fair assumption to make?
Well, the truth of the matter is that everybody has areas that are not symmetrical in their brain. The reality is that the brain develops strategies to deal with these things so that we live a relatively normal life. In other words, we don't have symptoms. Okay? Until those strategies can't handle it anymore. So if there's an added stress, or if there's a increase in, if you get a head injury or something that changes the way the strategy has to work, then we start feeling symptoms. So as long as your brain can establish or maintain that strategy, you're fine. You can, some people could go and, have exposure to an hour a day on the LEDs and not have any problems. Just like we all know people who are 85 and smoked all their life, and they don't have cancer. So it's kind of the same thing. Their body has somehow made a strategy against the damage that's happening. So it's individual, and that's the wonderful thing, and it's also the most disastrous thing, because you're your own experiment. And even if we do controlled studies, and we have this control group, and then we have the experimental group, the control group is never you. It's always an average of a bunch of people. So even then it's tough, because we can say, well, how come all of these people who took Upsenic or whatever the fat control drug is, they're losing weight and they're fine, but these people have shut down their gastric muscles and they die. So it's because it's an individual situation. And what we have been trained and brainwashed to believe is that a control group can take everyone and make them the same. And it just doesn't work that way. So even in a control group, you're going to have people who are on each end of that control group, which may not respond the way everybody else does. So it's especially when we're talking about the brain, man, it's an individual thing. So to answer your question, it depends. Some people can tolerate it, and then some people can't. And it also depends on the acute situation. So one day I go and I do 5 minutes, I'm fine. Next day I go do 5 minutes. Oh, wow, what the hell happened? Can't think straight. I'm, weak. What happened? Well, you didn't sleep well the night before, or you didn't have enough sugar in when I say sugar, I mean glucose. You didn't, there's increased stress in your life that has also impacted your brain. So all those things are, sort of swimming around in the background.
So do you think then these out of the box, one size fits all type devices that are specifically for the head, for the brain, some of them are putting out, they maybe have 6, 8 LEDs. I don't know of any that use laser, at least at a consumer, category. Some of them putting out 40, 50 milliwatts at the surface. So it's a decent amount. Typically 810s, 850s, 1060, I think, is often used as well. So do you think you should be cautious using them just like you would be? I mean, they're no different effectively to a high-powered panel anyway, right?
If you are looking at a mass statistic, and these people that manufacture these things can maybe say, 51% or 57% or 60% of the people that use this actually felt better. They had a good response. What they're really saying is 40 or 49% of the people didn't have a good response. And you check, usually what happens in these situations is that so if I order something off the internet, I've probably done a little bit of research. I've, think, oh, wow, my friend is using it. They're doing good. I'm going to order it. It's like $1,000. I spend $1,000. I put the thing on and I feel like crap. Normally what tends to happen is you feel embarrassed that you've been sucked in buying this thing. So you just chuck it on the desk and don't tell anybody that you did it. Okay. And so a lot of these responses that they're getting, or especially the good responses, are like they're inflated. Now, I'll go back to some very, very basic stuff. Probably 10, 15 years ago, I was doing some research with Harvard University in Boston, and we were doing research on children that had been abused, and they wanted to see if there was a difference between sexual abuse, physical abuse, psychological abuse in the brain. Because right now, the treatment for all those is the same. And if they actually do different things, then the treatment should be different. That was the hypothesis. And when we went there to look at how they were doing these things, the treatment that they were applying, okay, was called a standard montage. Okay, so they were measuring full EEGs, measuring full MRIs, all that stuff was great, and then the treatment was here and here, no matter what. And I said to them, what if that's not the right treatment for that person? And they said, well, in order to have statistical power in our research, we have to apply the same treatment to everybody. And I said, okay, that's great for research, but it's not good for the person. Okay. And we had this, continuing discussion about this. And then eventually they said, okay, well, then we need a protocol to decide where to put these things on. And that's sort of when things started to move forward. Now, that's what these things that you purchase off the internet, they use a standard montage. So they've went out and said, okay, there's 3 research studies that say, if I stimulate, this part of the brain and this part of the brain and this part of the brain, depression goes away. So they say, okay, well, that's what we'll do. So you put on a hat, set it for depression, and it stimulates those areas. Now, again, that goes back to you are an individual. You may or may not fall into that group that those areas cause depression. And that's why 100% of the time, you need to have data. You need to have some kind of objective measurement that measures you. And the only thing we have right now is EEG that will do that. So if you're going to get one of those helmets, and I have good friends that are producing these helmets, and they swear by them. Okay, they're good people, they're honest people, they're trying to help people, but at the end of the day, this is where we knock heads, because I just can't accept the fact that you can give a standard montage to someone and know that it's going to help them, because might be right 50% of the time, might be right 70% of the time. What about the times that it's not right? And at the very least, you're wasting their time and money. Okay? The worst case scenario is you're hurting.
Hey, if you're enjoying this video, can you just go down and hit the like button? Every few months, I take a look at all the videos we've published, and the ones that have got a lot of likes and a lot of comments tell me that, hey, I should do more videos like this. So pretty much, if you like this video and you want to see more videos like this, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't, and feel free to leave a comment as well. So I have just received the V-Lite, one of the V-Lite devices, and I thought, you know what, before I start doing it, I'll do an EEG. So when I was up with Thomas the other day, I thought, hey, do we have time, and can I book one in? So I was going to talk to you about that later, but I thought at least to get a baseline before. I mean, I played around with it the other night, just one session, but I thought before I get serious into using it, I should do those checks. So maybe later on when we get the results, we could go through them, and you could tell me whether I'd be silly or using such a device. But let's move on. It'd be good to talk about the laser we're using for Thomas, my son, who, for those of you who didn't see the first interview I did with Dr. Beck, my son, Thomas, he was diagnosed with epilepsy as a 2-year-old, and we're working with Dr. Beck in his clinic in Perth. Yeah, so far so good. Hasn't had a seizure for coming up 2 years now, which is great. He's still obviously on, or not obviously, he's still on medication. So I think in the coming months, all going well, we'll start taking him off that, which is going to be nerve-wracking. But anyway, he is using a laser now. Do you want to talk about this, the challenges, I guess, of finding the right product at a good price point? That's the key thing.
Yes, absolutely. Because you can get exceptional lasers. There are laser companies out there that are just incredibly accurate and incredibly well produced, but they're $25,000 US. So for someone to purchase one of those for their home, and it's kind of out of the question for most people. So what we offer at the Institute, which we've developed since COVID, is a telemedicine program, basically a home-based program where we monitor the treatments when the people are doing them in the home. And that's you're participating in that to a certain extent. I mean, you've come to Perth, but you've also done the home program. So we needed to find a laser that we could use in the home program that was exceptionally accurate and well manufactured, met our criteria for intensity and wavelengths, but also fell sort of below that sort of $3,000 US mark. Now, I was astounded when we started to search at the incredible complexity of trying to find companies that are quality companies and that would produce the lasers in the area, that the wavelengths that we needed and the intensities we needed. And excuse me, it really opened my eyes to, oh my God, this is how are people that don't know a lot about laser actually, navigating this space, because it's incredible. I mean, I think we were searching for about 6 months. Now, you came on in the last sort of 6 weeks or so and found more lasers than I did. I didn't know, I didn't have your contacts in China and stuff like that. But the point is, it was very frustrating. It was very difficult to find anything. It was very, like sometimes you'd think, oh, I've got one, meets all these criteria. Then you actually talk to the people. Oh, well, it's, we haven't really tested it to see if it puts out those wavelengths. We haven't really, it's never been used on people. It's only for horses or, whatever. So finally we did find this laser, which actually met all the criteria. And then we ordered these and you put them through some testing processes, which I would really like for you to describe to everyone what testing processes you did and what you found.
Yeah, I'm just pulling up the data here. So I have a spectrometer. It cost me a couple of $1,000s, probably about 4 or 5 years ago. It's I've had it compared to some lab this testing labs, that use $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 meters, and it's pretty much bang on. So what it does is tests wavelength. So it will show wavelength. The spectrometer, it's going from, it's the visual spectrum up to 1050 nanometers, so just into the near infrared there as well. But it'll also show intensity, irradiance. So yeah, this particular device that we had, it was marketed as having 905 nanometers and 980 nanometers. Actually, a bit of a hiccup with the communication, but mine also has 810. Now, yeah, the device was putting out 810. These are lasers, not LEDs. I can probably put something on screen as well. The 905 was peaking at about 901, and the 980 was coming in at about 967. So yeah, there was a bit of a discrepancy there. And this is probably why this device was only $3,000 and not $30,000. Because yeah, I mean, it's what you're working with. It's the same with consumer LED panels. Like, for anyone that's watched my reviews, I test all of them, and there was a period a few years ago where it wasn't very often that the marketed wavelength lined up with what was actually being put out. I mean, it's getting better now, hopefully, as a result of my work, but also other people becoming aware of this stuff. And then I also tested the power levels, which came in around 200 milliwatts over centimeter squared. That was a bit tricky to measure. Just dealing with lasers is very different to LEDs. And it had a pulsing function, so I can't detect power at pulsing. It messes up the reading. So that was pretty the closest I could come up with in terms of your criteria. I know you wanted a lot in the 900 and above, your wavelength in the 900 above, and you gave me a dosage that you wanted. Can't remember exactly what you were requesting, but it was in that ballpark. So yeah, it's and it's a heavy duty laser. I mean, it's a serious piece of kit. It's a bit different to your plastic little LED devices, the plastic wand stuff, and it packs a punch. Like, it's got some heat as well.
Absolutely. Now, can you just for my knowledge too, can you tell me why is it different testing a laser from an LED? What's the difference?
It purely just from so I'll get the device just a minute. So this is the spectrometer I use here, right? It's like $3,000-$4,000. The sensor is at the top here. With an LED, I mean, it's picking up. The LED spreads a lot, as you know. We talked about this in the first interview. Whereas the laser is obviously a lot more focused. So you just got to get everything lined up and just trying to sit it in the right spot. And then, of course, the lasers alternate. There was the 905 and then the 980. So you had to try measure it. And because I was trying to hold it's just literally like a practicality point of view. If it was a square device, I could sit them all up, but because it was rounded and it was wobbling, it was just hard getting a reading right in front of the laser. When the light is pulsing, yeah, the meter's no good for that. So I had to run it in continuous. But yeah.
Okay, excellent. Beauty. So the other issue that we sort of came up against is that there are certain safety issues that are usually built into the laser. So, for instance, when the wavelength is within the visual field, you can actually see the lasers on. Okay. And when we get up to 900 and above, you can't see the laser. So even if it's on, it looks like nothing's happening. Can't see anything. So usually what companies will do is they'll put an LED array so that when the laser's on, the LEDs light up, and that tells you that the laser is functioning. So with this particular model, there is no indication other than the little light saying it's on. So we have to really be careful that we're not sort of what's going on and looking at it and burning out our eyes. So these safety issues all obviously cost extra money. So when we get down to this level, they've sort of cut most of those out. But that's something else that we need to think about. And also, this laser is it's quite powerful, actually, for the amount of money that we've spent on them. And it can actually create a little bit of heat on the skin. And so people need to realize that if you start feeling that heat and it starts to get too intense, you have to stop, because you can burn the skin. These are not toys. They're actually pretty powerful lasers. So when we got the laser, what we had to do is recalculate our exposure times, because there's two wavelengths happening at the same time. Okay, whereas before we only had one wavelength happening. So basically, what's happened is we've through the calculations we've reduced the exposure time from 1 minute to 30 seconds, and that seems to be doing well. We haven't had anyone complaining. Interestingly enough, we use the laser in for other things. Okay, and one of them is Parkinson's disease. But when we do the laser treatment on Parkinson's, we do the head, and we do the gut, the connection, and they feel heat in the gut way more than they do on their head. So the tissues are absorbing more heat in the gut, and it's probably because of the fat tissue or whatever is there. So we had to look at what tissues are being irradiated with the laser in the gut to the brain. So even changing the location on the body changes the dose that you need, because really what you want isn't the surface dose, which is what most lasers measure. We want to know the target dose, because if it's in the brain, we want to know, 2-3 centimeters in, or if it's in the gut, we want to get into that actual small intestine. So it might be, this far. So that is another thing that has to be taken into account.
Lots of questions I could ask here. That is a trade-off, isn't it, with treating deep into the brain or the body? You're going to get a lot more energy at the surface. I mean, we talked about this earlier. And I know that's something that people often tell me. They're like, hey, you're overdoing it. And I'm like, yeah, but you're coming at it from a skin beauty angle. I'm coming at it from more the joint recovery side of things. With the gut then, correct me if I'm wrong, but there'd be more nerves in a gut in the stomach than there would in the brain, right? Like, can the brain actually feel, if you were to drill in, can the brain feel anything? Like, if the brain was heated, for instance, would you feel that?
No, because there are no nerves detecting pain and things like that in the brain. That's why, that's why when people do brain surgery, so there are receptors in the skin and in the scalp. So they use anesthetic, local anesthetic, and then they can take a piece off your brain and they can actually stimulate your brain, but you don't feel any. Once you're past the meninges, you don't feel anything. So you're right. And in fact, there's more research coming out showing that there are more neurons in the gut than there are in the spinal cord. So there's a whole nervous system down here that we don't even understand.
Before I dive into that, because that was one of my questions, I do just want to take a moment to say, look, everything we're doing here with Thomas, I'm following your lead, right? I've seen how careful and selective you were with the device, very particular about the protocols. Anyone watching this, please don't rush out and find a laser and start treating yourself. Like, honestly, just don't do it. I mean, you could literally cook yourself. I mean, you could do some damage to the brain, because I've seen Thomas after 45, 50 seconds, he'll say, oh, it's getting hot. I know not all of that energy, only a small fraction is getting deep into the brain, but one could do a lot of damage here, especially, we're talking about the brain, like you said earlier. Now, I personally won't go, I've got this device. I played with it. I haven't used it on me. I thought one day if I had a bad joint injury, I would put it, on the knee or whatever. But I'm not going near this with the head, with the brain. It's even why with the V-Light that I talked about earlier, like I went and done the scan, and I'm a little bit, cautious going into that. So just full, what's the word? Not disclosure, disclaimer. Just don't play around with the brain. If you want to, then reach out to someone like Dr. Beck or someone who has experience with this stuff. I mean, I'd say talk to your doctor, but you're regular GP is going to have no idea. So just be careful with it, because this is serious sort of stuff. And it's obviously not just some new supplement that you can pop and you're going to focus on it.
I think that's extremely important what you just said, because you don't know how many emails I'm getting from people who have said, "Oh, I went out and bought this laser and I don't know how to use it. Can you tell me how to use it?" First of all, in the treatment process, and you can attest to this, because I remember when you first contacted me, you wanted Thomas to have laser, basically. And I said, well, yeah, maybe if he needs it. Okay, we've got to go through a process to figure out how his brain works, how he responds to the conservative treatment, how, before we use the laser. So, and we went through that process. So you don't just buy a laser and, put it on your head. Sometimes the laser isn't the most appropriate treatment right away. So I would say to people, don't buy a laser until you're guided to buy a laser with specific, requirements.
Yeah, and we touched. I think you did a pretty good job explaining that in the first interview. How, and not only that, but how you do a lot of testing, so you know what you're working with. You're not just flying blind. With the gut, can you then overdo it with the gut? I mean, it's with the links to the brain, like the stuff we were talking about earlier. Does that apply to the gut then?
Yeah. Well, the truth is, you can, if laser actually produces the effects that we believe it does, and there's no reason to believe it doesn't. A lot of research showing it does now. In fact, more and more research coming out every day that is showing what the laser does. Okay, so we're pretty much over that hurdle, that we pretty much know that the laser is doing stuff. Okay, it's now determining how much, what wavelengths are doing what. When I first started in laser, they didn't actually specify that different wavelengths actually stimulated different things. Now, when you say that now, you go, well, of course. But back then, it was like, oh, okay, let's get in there and, do some stuff. Now, the truth is, we don't know what happens in the gut with the laser. However, we're doing, the reason we're using gut stimulation with Parkinson's is because of that connection, and we're getting spectacular results. It's like, wow, just by putting that laser on the gut. Now, we're also doing research into all different other kinds of things, like ovarian cysts and types of things with female fertility and things like that with the laser. It's all in a very early stage, but the results coming out are, having babies. It's working. So we don't know maybe why it's working, but it's probably got to do with increasing blood flow, increasing ATP, all that stuff that we know the laser does.
Have you looked, or do you have any experience with IV lasers, like laser irradiation? Did I say that right? Of the blood, with like getting the fiber optic lasers. I don't know. I actually don't know how they work, but I've just read about it. I've seen how they use it for immune system support, but I've also seen the theory that light affects the spinal fluid, and that the light photons can be carried to the brain and potentially influence the brain cells. Are you aware of this stuff? I mean, could we potentially just shine a light on the wrist, for instance, and get full body benefits? I mean, is it something that you've looked into?
Well, first of all, you have to realize that the effects of the laser are transient, which means they're only there when the laser's on. If you take the laser off, the effects drop pretty much immediately. unless you're doing something else to encourage the body to use the ATP that's produced and other stuff. So just shining a light on your wrist might increase some of the effects in the blood, but for a very short range. Because as soon as the blood gets out of the sort of target area of the laser, it's going to start diminishing effects. So basically, by the time it gets to your heart, it's probably not going to have much effect left. Now, there may be stuff that is happening long-term that we don't know about yet. Okay, which is a very real possibility that at some point we could just, shine light on our neck, for instance, and, cure cancer. I mean, I don't know. But the other thing is I wanted to mention, now that I've talked about the neck, when we're doing the full body radiance, you also have to be careful of penetration into the thyroid, because that thyroid affects a lot of stuff. And if the light is changing the activity of the thyroid, then you have to be very careful. Now, for some people that have hypothyroidism, or the thyroid isn't working enough, that might actually help them. But people that have hyperthyroid may actually make them worse. So again, it's an individual thing. We always have to remember that it's what is my situation and how is the laser or the light array going to affect my situation. So there are certain things to be aware of. But I'm sorry, I went aside on that, but that's just another thing that I wanted to make sure people realize, that there are certain medical conditions that we need to be careful when we're either increasing or decreasing the physiology around them.
Yeah, I know later this year, the PBM 2024, James Carroll and a bunch of others are helping to organize. And I believe you're going to attend that event. Is that correct? Yes, cool. So I'll be there as well. And I know there's a lot of researchers, obviously it's specialized in photobiomodulation. I know there's one that works with eye health. I forgot the other ones right now, but there's a list of them over at their website. And it's almost like we need these experts to appear, someone who specializes in thyroid health and photobiomodulation. And then, someone who has thyroid issue, you work with them, or you look at their research and, you can find the right dosing protocols and wavelengths and all of that. And, someone like yourself when it comes to the brain. And then we've already got people out there who are pretty clued up in regards to dentistry or even joint health. I mean, Thor laser, for instance, really good at that. But it's kind of what needs to happen. Like, you need to have these experts emerge who know their stuff in a particular field, so you can go and get particular doses and products in that.
Actually, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just want to give a shout out to James Carroll, because he's one of the people who are really have a lot of integrity and are really trying to understand the science behind what's happening with the lasers. And I've read a lot of his work and discussed a lot of these things with him. So he's a good guy. And if you can read his stuff, I would recommend you do it. And he works with a good team also. Just that's a shout to James. That's all.
Yeah, and I mean, he's done great things and he knows his stuff. I know you said you've prepared a few slides. So do you want to? Should we put them on screen and you can walk through them? I am conscious at the time.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. So I wanted to talk about a few things and just also mention that the slides that I'm showing are part of a larger presentation that I'm going to be uploading to the YouTube channel as soon as we're done this, so that if people want to see this in more detail, they can just zip over to the YouTube channel, which if you could put the link in the
Of course, yeah, I'll put all the links down below to your channel.
And then they'll just be able to click on it and go to it. But this first slide here, we were talking about penetration. And a lot of the, in fact, all of the lasers so far, basically talk about surface intensity. So when you are turning on the laser, it's the surface intensity on the skin that's being measured. The real issue, though, is what is getting to the target. So if your target is the dermis of the skin, so we want to go past the epidermis into the deep dermal layers of the skin to get all these, wonderful responses, then there has to be an intensity level that reaches that area. Excuse me. The same as if we're trying to get into the cortex of the brain. We have to go through, the skin, the bone, the cerebrospinal fluid, and, any scar tissue or anything else that's there. And all of that stuff causes attenuation. So I just wanted to point out so that basically when we have, let's say we say 200 milliwatts per centimeter square or whatever the reading is on the skin, a lot of that is being reflected off right away. So we get this reflection happening with a lot of the, power that's coming in. And then we get some of the light gets stopped at different areas inside whatever tissue we're trying to penetrate. Usually it's at the border of where one tissue ends and another starts. That's where a lot of the light gets either absorbed or reflected away again. So for instance, here we're getting reflection off the dermis. So that's not doing anything in that tissue that we're trying to stimulate, because that's just that energy is being lost. It's gone. And so this is the problem, is trying to calculate what the intensity is at the target tissue. We have a few things to consider here. So for instance, some light intensities, so we have here alpha and we have beta. These are wavelengths. Okay, so alpha is a wavelength of between 8 and 10 times per second, and beta is a bit higher. But as we get up, we see as we get higher and higher in the wavelengths, the penetration goes deeper. Now, there are some variations to this. And the reason that there's variation is because the different tissues that we have to go through, and this is a graph that you're going to see quite commonly. Now, it'll be in a different various forms. But basically, when we're talking about biologically active laser stimulation, really there's only this window here where it's showing this black line where things are actually penetrating enough to get to the target tissue. Now, the reason for that is that light is attenuated or absorbed or reflected very highly by things like water. So this blue line is showing water. So as we get sort of higher in the wavelengths, water starts deflecting more and more and more. And there are other things like hemoglobin and oxyhemoglobin and melatonin, melanin. Made a mistake again. Melanin, this black line, which I was talking about before, will also cause, a considerable attenuation of the beam. So really, if we're going to get deep into the skin, for instance, we need to be we can probably get a bit of penetration here at the sort of 860 sort of range. And you'll find that a lot of the lasers that are designed for like joint treatments or skin treatments, they're coming in around 810 to 860, somewhere in there in the wavelength, which still has to deal with the water and the hemoglobin and all that other stuff. But as we get up more, sort of into the 900 and above, you'll see that this only has to worry about the water stuff. Now, so you're going to get deep penetration with that wavelength. Now, when we're talking about the brain, we have to put the bone in there. And with the bone, there's a trade-off again. So the higher the frequency you go, the less penetration you get on the bone. Now, it's not a straight line, but there are certain wavelengths that will go farther into the bone than others. And I do have some slides about that, but I don't have it right here. But you can go to the presentation on the YouTube channel and I'll explain that. But so that's why when we're talking about brain stimulation, we want to be up over the 900 mark and even into the 1,000 if we can, which puts us past all these. Now, there's still bone to be dealt with and cerebral spinal fluid and things, but you get an idea that this is technically the therapeutic window. So technically, if I'm a producer of lasers, I can make a 610 laser and say that it's within the therapeutic window. But as you look at this, you'll see that, oh, yes, it's within the therapeutic window, but how much of that is getting to where I want it to go? Okay. And so this is where you have to have a bit of knowledge about wavelengths. And I would say if you're doing skin penetration, if you're doing anything into joints, you need to be up above 800. If you're going into the brain, that's a whole different story. You got to be up at least 960 to, into the thousands even. Okay, so this is the research that's been done. This is not just me saying this. This is actual research that has measured the penetration stuff. Now, this is, you were talking about pulsation and direct dose. So it again changes, okay, based on the wavelengths that are used. So if we have, so we can see here, a short pulse with a short wavelength is not going to penetrate very far. But if we have a long wavelength and a long pulse, we can penetrate deeper. So again, what level of pulsation is your laser using? What wavelength is it using? They all have an effect on basically how far they penetrate. And then we can look at even the different tissues. So the white matter in the brain are basically pathways, they're axons, which have a high fat content. And so you can see the penetration is not as great as in the gray matter, which are the brain parenchyma proper. In other words, the brain cells. They get a better penetration because they don't have such a high fat content. Okay, so I'm not trying to go into the weeds on this. I'm just trying to give you and your viewers an idea of the complexity that has to be considered when you're dealing with these things.
Yeah, I mean, it just reinforces the point we made earlier, where don't mess around with your brain. There's so many unknowns.
Exactly. So this is what I was talking about with the light radiation on the full body. So we start off and we get a good response. Okay, and then as soon as we start to hit overexposure, then the response starts to fall off. Okay, and this biphasic response is not just in laser, it's in all kinds of physiological processes. So it's almost like a general rule, I suppose, in physiology. Because the same thing will happen is in arousal stimulus, for instance. So what I can use as an example is studying for an exam. Okay, so if you don't study enough, you get a bad mark. But if you study too much, you also get a bad mark. You have to hit the sweet spot. Okay, and it's the same with arousal. So if I get aroused, there's a certain amount of arousal, it'll produce a maximum response. But then hyperarousal causes me to reduce my activity level and my success. Okay, so this is kind of a general rule of physiology. It's not just with laser, it's with a lot of things. But this is very important if you start to feel that, this even applies to physical weight lifting. So if you're within this range of muscle stimulation that causes muscle growth, and then you go into, if you start over stimulating, you start to reduce muscle growth. Okay, so it's the same principle. But that's what's important with the laser stuff, is that if you start to feel crappy, reduce the dosage and see if that changes things. Now, the other thing, I'm thinking you were going to ask about supplements. You can reduce the negative effect by having supplementation. And the supplements you need are anything that basically helps ATP production. So you need the B vitamin complex. You need, I would say, fish oil, because if you're stimulating nerve growth, you need to grow axons, which need oil, which need the oils in fish oil to actually make the myelin sheath. So I would say B complex vitamins, fish oil. I would also put in some antioxidants, because as we increase our ATP production, we also start increasing the free radical production. Now, when I went to school, we called them free radicals. Now they call them reactive oxygen species, ROS. So, and those are good to a point. And then again, once they hit too much, there's a negative feedback happening. So we can absorb some of those with antioxidants like vitamin C and CoQ10. So if you're going to start a light regime, even just on your skin, I would also advise you, probably a week before you start taking vitamin B complex, vitamin C, CoQ10, fish oil, and that's probably enough to start with.
The other one that you have Thomas on is glutathione.
Glutathione is kind of like the mother of all antioxidants. It's absorbing these. Basically, what happens when we have a reactive oxygen species produced is we get these radical, non-stable ions that tend to go into the cell nucleus and react with DNA. Okay, so once they hit a certain level, they'll start destabilizing DNA. So we don't want that, especially in the brain. But I mean, you don't want that anywhere. And that glutathione is just like this big, puffy marshmallow man absorbing all these free radicals that are being produced. So glutathione is very good also. And thanks for reminding me about that.
No, it's okay. Thomas has been taking them for a while. I'm responsible for his medication and supplements, so I'm when he gets low, I've got to order some more. It's very, very interesting, and I look forward to seeing your presentation on this because the dosing is the most complex topic within this whole field because it varies so much, like whether you're treating the skin or a joint or the brain. And then the other crazy thing is there's research showing that this particular wavelength has these beneficial results on this disease or injury or whatever it may be. But that doesn't mean that other wavelengths or twice the power or half the power is going to lead to better results. It's just that that's one little thing we know, right? Like we don't know it's one piece of that puzzle. And yes, there are thousands of studies on photobiomodulation, but it's still so confusing and complex. But at the same time, I know I guess just my gut instinct that when it comes to the brain itself, this is something that you have to be a little bit careful with and do the test and work with someone who knows this stuff like yourself. So, hey, look, I appreciate your time as always. I've got a bunch of other questions here, but maybe we save them for a part 3. And maybe when I've had when I've got my results, maybe we should go through them and you could I don't know, we could come up with a protocol. Who knows? Let's talk about that later. But look, I will be putting links to your presentation. I will put links to your clinic. And for anyone going to PVM 2024, I will be there. Dr. Beck will be there. So to reach out and say hi, I'll put a link to that event as well. What else? What else do you want to share with the audience?
Well, I just want to say thank you for doing the work you do and doing the channel, putting the channel up. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of, stress in your life, but a lot of good is coming out of it because this is an area that is it's like, the wild, wild west. And we've got a lot of cowboys out there. And so your work is essential and what you're doing is amazing. So I just want to say, from my heart, thank you for what you're doing because it's starting to shed light on the situation and it's starting to shed the light that, hey, man, we don't know a lot yet. So be careful.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you as well. And obviously, thank you for all the time and research that you're doing, which in turn is helping, my son, which is how we linked up in the first place. And hopefully in 12 months' time, we can when we're doing another call like this, I'll say Thomas is nearly 3 years seizure free and off the medication. That would be amazing. And he's actually doing really, really well just in terms of behavior. I mean, he's at school now, 8 weeks into school, and he's like a different kid. I mean, we saw my grandparents over the Easter break, and even they were like, he's much more resilient and he's doing good. So whether that's the treatments, like you'll never know for sure. But I can say that since we started working with you, like I wouldn't say it's been a linear upward progression in terms of behavior and wellness and learning, and that there's been some ups and downs as we've spoken about, but it's definitely been a massive improvement. So thank you for all the work that you're doing and your team and all the time that you've put into him and the protocols. So
well, I say that's a perfect example of what you just said about. So what it says in the textbook is it does this, right? What it does in reality is all over the place because he's an individual and you have to take in individual, parameters with him. And that's why we do repeated testing. And so there's a perfect example of reality. And you can actually experience it yourself. So it's a journey. Okay. And the journey is finding out what works best and what dosages work best and what locations work best. And that's why I shudder when I think about these sort of cap things happening, because it's just, It never does that. And that's what they're basing their cat on.
Yeah, I may have to rethink that experiment of mine, but we can talk about that later on. Anyway, thank you again.
It'll be safer if you have an EEG, and then I can tell you, okay, these are the changes we would expect. Then we do another EEG, and if those changes happen, okay, then you're fine. But doing it without guidance or without supervision is just crazy.
Yeah. Well, maybe we will do something like that, especially now I've got the baseline EEG.
Yes.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe we'll do a follow-up on that in a couple of months' time once we've gone through it. I will leave you to it because I know you have another appointment. Thank you again. I'll put all the links down below, and enjoy the rest of your day. And I look forward to crossing paths. We'll probably be in London, which is kind of crazy, in August. So look forward to seeing you then.
Okay, then. See you later. And thank you, everyone, for your attention.
All right, that's a wrap. I really hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. I'm sure there's going to be more follow-up questions as a result of this part 2 interview. Remember, if you haven't seen part 1, go back and watch that as well. If you do have questions or want clarity on something, leave those all down below, and I will do a part 3 maybe later in the year. More importantly, though, if you do have a brain condition or you're just nervous about using the red light therapy on your face, on your head, then yeah, reach out to Dr. Beck. All the links are down below. You don't want to mess around when it comes to the brain. I mean, I am out there, I guess, when it comes to experimentation and using red light therapy devices, but I'm always very nervous when it comes to the brain. So look, just be careful. I mean, we covered it all earlier, but don't mess around with this stuff. Work with someone who knows what they're talking about, who knows red light therapy, who knows the brain. Do it under their supervision. Anyway, again, like, subscribe, and also check out this video. Chances are you're going to like it as much as you've liked this one.